The lock clicked open easier than Marcus expected, but then church security had never been his biggest challenge. He slipped through the back door of St. Catherine's, his practiced eyes already scanning the darkened sanctuary for anything worth taking. 23 churches in 5 states, and they all kept their treasures in predictable places. The beam of his penlight swept across brass candlesticks on the altar, heavy and old enough to fetch decent money. His worn sneakers made no sound on the carpeted aisle as he moved deeper into the sacred space, treating it like any other mark. The collection box near the entrance had yielded $37, barely worth the effort, but the Real prizes waited up front. Marcus had been doing this for 3 years now, ever since losing custody of Sarah. Churches were easy targets, full of guilt-ridden congregations who never wanted to press charges against a desperate man. He told himself he was borrowing, not stealing, though he never intended to return anything. The Virgin Mary statue stood in her alcove, crowned with what looked like real silver. Marcus approached without hesitation, his hands already reaching for the precious metal that would pay for another week of survival on the streets. His fingers had barely touched the silver crown when the voice stopped him cold. "Marcus, why do you take what is not yours?" The words came from directly in front of him, clear and unmistakably feminine, spoken with a gentleness that somehow made his hands shake worse than any police siren ever had. He jerked backward, his penlight clattering to the floor, but the beam still illuminated the Virgin Mary statue. Her painted eyes seemed to follow his movement. This was not happening. 23 churches, and none of their decorations had ever talked back to him. Marcus rubbed his eyes hard, blaming exhaustion or bad street drugs he might have unknowingly consumed. But when he looked again, those serene features held an expression of infinite sadness. "You are lost, my son, but you are not forgotten." The voice came again, and this time Marcus felt something impossible, a warmth spreading through the cold church air, carrying the scent of roses in December. His knees buckled, and he found himself kneeling on the altar steps, staring up at a statue that could not possibly be speaking, but undeniably was. The back door creaked open behind him, and heavy footsteps echoed through the sanctuary. Henry Morrison, the volunteer night security guard, called out in his gravelly retired cop voice, but Marcus could not move, could not look away from eyes that held no condemnation despite his crime. Henry Morrison had worked security for 30 years before retirement, but nothing had prepared him for finding a grown man weeping on his knees before the Virgin Mary statue. The intruder should have been running, should have been fighting or pleading, but instead he knelt motionless, staring upward with an expression Henry had never seen on a criminal's face. What stopped Henry from immediately calling the police was the scent. Roses, unmistakable and overwhelming, filled the December air of an unheated church. His breath should have been visible in the cold, but warmth radiated from the altar area like invisible sunlight. "Do not fear, Henry. Bear witness to what love can accomplish." The voice that spoke was not the intruder's. Henry's hand froze halfway to his radio as he realized the words came from the statue itself, from lips that had never moved in the 40 years he had attended St. Catherine's. His knees nearly gave out when the painted eyes shifted, meeting his gaze with infinite compassion. The burglar looked back at Henry with tears streaming down his face. "I heard her too," the man whispered. "She knows my name. She knows what I've done." Henry sank onto a pew, his radio forgotten. In 4 decades of law enforcement, he had arrested hundreds of thieves, but he had never watched one transformed by divine intervention. The roses grew stronger, and both men felt something sacred settling around them like a benediction. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but Marcus barely noticed the flashing lights through the stained glass windows. Henry had convinced the officers to wait outside while he talked to the shaken man who claimed the Virgin Mary had spoken to him. 3 years of stealing from churches, Marcus explained between broken sobs, all because he had lost everything that mattered. His daughter Sarah was 8 when the court took her away. The addiction had started after his wife left, pain pills after a construction accident becoming his only escape from loneliness. One positive drug test during a custody hearing, and suddenly he was a weekend visitor instead of a full-time father. Then the weekend stopped too. Marcus pulled out his cracked phone to show Henry the only photo he carried, a little girl with pigtails grinning gap-toothed at the camera. I told myself I was going to get clean, get a job, get her back. But 3 years later, I'm stealing from God himself. The phone buzzed in his trembling hands. Unknown number, probably debt collectors, but something made him answer. Marcus Williams? This is Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Sarah has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The Virgin Mary's words echoed in his mind as his world collapsed again. You are lost, my son, but you are not forgotten. How could anyone remember him when he had forgotten how to be a father? Henry drove Marcus to Memorial Hospital without calling the police back, understanding that some emergencies transcended earthly justice. In the intensive care unit, Marcus stared through glass at his daughter's broken body, machines breathing for her, while doctors spoke in hushed tones about brain trauma and uncertain outcomes. Sarah looked impossibly small, surrounded by tubes and wires, her face pale against white hospital pillows. The nurse explained that a drunk driver had hit her while she walked home from school. Internal bleeding, skull fracture, induced coma to reduce swelling. The next 48 hours would determine everything. Marcus had not prayed since childhood, but desperation taught him to remember forgotten words. Kneeling in the hospital chapel, he bargained with God like he had never dared bargain with earthly judges. Take my life instead of hers. Give me her pain. I will do anything, be anything, if you let her live. The Virgin Mary's voice seemed to whisper through his memory, calling him her son even as he knelt in stolen clothes with stolen money in his pockets. He had spent 3 years telling himself he was beyond redemption, too far gone for forgiveness. But watching his daughter fight for each breath made him realize that grace was not something he could earn or lose. It was something freely given to the desperate and broken. The change came at dawn on the second day, when Sarah's brain swelling suddenly decreased without medical explanation. Dr. Patricia Chun had treated hundreds of head trauma cases, but she had never seen readings improve so dramatically overnight. The machines that had been breathing for Sarah began registering her own respiratory efforts. Her pupils responded to light for the first time since the accident. By afternoon, Sarah was breathing on her own. By evening, she opened her eyes and asked for water. The medical team gathered around her chart, discussing the impossible recovery in hushed, amazed tones. Marcus stood by her bedside, holding her small hand while tears of gratitude streamed down his face. "Daddy, where have you been?" Sarah's voice was weak but clear, and Marcus realized she was the first person in years to call him by that name with love instead of legal obligation. Her foster mother had been contacted, but for now, in this miraculous moment, he was simply her father again. The scent of roses filled the hospital room, so faint that only Marcus noticed it. He understood then that the Virgin Mary who had called him her son had also protected his daughter, had heard the desperate prayers of a broken thief, and answered with mercy beyond comprehension. Sarah smiled up at him with eyes that held no memory of pain, only joy at seeing her daddy's face after 3 years of separation and silence. Marcus returned to St. Catherine's the following Sunday, entering through the front door like any other parishioner instead of sneaking through the back like a thief. Father Rodriguez recognized him immediately from Henry's description, but the priest's weathered face showed curiosity rather than anger as Marcus approached after morning Massachusetts. "I need to confess what I did," Marcus said simply, "and I need to make it right." The confessional had not heard such a detailed admission in Father Rodriguez's 30 years of ministry. Marcus held nothing back, describing not just the attempted theft, but the 3 years of church burglaries that had preceded it. He spoke of his daughter's miracle and his certainty that the Virgin Mary had intervened to save them both. Word of the confession spread quickly through the small parish. Margaret Sullivan, who had donated the silver crown, demanded to know why the thief was not in jail. Bill Morrison, Henry's brother, questioned whether criminals belonged in their sanctuary. But Father Rodriguez reminded them that Christ himself had promised paradise to a thief who showed genuine repentance. Marcus began arriving at dawn each day to clean the church, scrub the floors, polish the brass that he once would have stolen. His hands, accustomed to taking, learned the discipline of giving. Slowly, reluctantly, the parish members began to see that his transformation ran deeper than mere gratitude for his daughter's recovery. Detective Robert Harrison had worked theft cases for 15 years, but he had never received help from one of the thieves themselves. Marcus sat in the police station, providing detailed information about fences, storage locations, and criminal networks he had operated within for 3 years. His cooperation led to the recovery of dozens of stolen religious artifacts across 5 counties. Sacred vessels returned to Methodist churches, hand-carved crucifixes restored to Baptist sanctuaries, and antique Bibles recovered for Presbyterian congregations. Marcus insisted on personally delivering each item, offering apologies to pastors and congregations he had wronged. Some forgave immediately, others needed time, but all witnessed his genuine transformation. The breakthrough with Sarah came during one of these restitution visits. She was allowed supervised time with her father, and he brought her to see the restored altar at Grace Lutheran, where he had returned a 19th-century communion set. Sarah watched him carefully polish silver chalices that he once would have stolen, her 80-year-old mind beginning to understand that people could change. "Daddy, are you good now?" she asked as they walked back to his borrowed car. Marcus knelt to meet her eyes, remembering the Virgin Mary's infinite compassion when she had called him her son despite his crimes. "I am learning to be good, sweetheart. Every day, with help from people who love us, I am learning to be the daddy you deserve." Henry Morrison had never been comfortable speaking publicly, but the retired security guard found himself sharing his testimony with increasing frequency. At the monthly parish council meeting, he described hearing the Virgin Mary's voice with the same precision he once used writing police reports. The scent of roses, the moving eyes, the supernatural warmth that had transformed a hardened thief into a servant of God. Word spread beyond St. Catherine's through Henry's brother Bill, then through Margaret Sullivan's prayer circle, then through Father Rodriguez's monthly newsletter. Reporter Jennifer Walsh arrived from the county newspaper expecting to debunk another religious hoax, but she left 3 hours later carrying notes about unexplained phenomena she could not rationalize away. Other visitors came seeking proof or hoping for their own miracles. Dr. Patricia Chun, Sarah's physician, visited the statue after hearing Marcus's story from hospital chaplains. She knelt where the thief had knelt, and later told colleagues she had experienced an overwhelming sense of peace that helped her understand healing beyond medical science. The Virgin Mary statue had become a pilgrimage destination. Couples struggling in marriage, addicts seeking recovery, families torn by betrayal and loss. Each visitor found something different, but many reported the same rose fragrance, the same gentle voice calling them beloved children regardless of their failures or fears. The church renovation project began 6 months after Marcus's transformation, funded by donations from parishes whose stolen artifacts he had helped recover. Father Rodriguez suggested that restoring the sanctuary would provide healing for both the building and the community that had struggled to accept their reformed thief as a brother in faith. Marcus worked alongside Bill Morrison, Henry's brother who had initially demanded his arrest. Together they refinished pews, repaired damaged plaster, and installed new lighting around the Virgin Mary's alcove. Margaret Sullivan, once his harshest critic, brought sandwiches for the work crew and found herself asking Marcus about his daughter's recovery. The most powerful moment came when Sarah visited the church for the first time. Now 9 years old and living with her father again after months of supervised visits, she stood before the Virgin Mary statue with quiet reverence. "This is the lady who saved you and me, Daddy?" she asked, her small hand slipping into his calloused palm. Marcus nodded, remembering the night he had knelt here as a broken thief. The statue's face held the same infinite compassion, But now he understood that the Virgin Mary's love extended through human hands as well. Bill Morrison ruffled Sarah's hair with grandfatherly affection, and Margaret Sullivan offered to teach her how to arrange altar flowers, turning former enemies into family through shared witness of miraculous grace. The county jail ministry began when Father Rodriguez asked Marcus to accompany him on weekly visits to incarcerated men struggling with addiction. Marcus found himself facing inmates who reminded him of his former self, desperate and convinced they were beyond redemption. His testimony of the Virgin Mary's intervention carried weight because he spoke from lived experience rather than theoretical faith. Tommy Rodriguez, no relation to the priest, was serving 6 months for drug possession when Marcus first shared his story. The young man listened with skepticism until Marcus described the exact desperation of losing custody, the specific shame of disappointing everyone who had ever believed in him. By the third visit, Tommy was asking how someone like him could find the grace Marcus described. The rehabilitation program grew from these jail visits. Marcus partnered with Father Rodriguez to create a halfway house in the church basement, providing temporary housing for men transitioning from incarceration to employment. Sarah, now 10 years old, helped serve meals to residents and showed them the Virgin Mary statue where her daddy had been transformed. The program's success attracted attention from social services and other parishes. Marcus trained volunteers to share their own testimonies, understanding that healing multiplied when broken people offered hope to others still trapped in darkness. Each man who found redemption through their ministry became proof that the Virgin Mary's intervention had created ripples extending far beyond one December night. 5 years after that December night, St. Catherine's hosted its annual Memorial of Mercy, commemorating the evening the Virgin Mary had spoken to a broken thief and transformed a community. Marcus stood before the congregation, no longer the desperate man who had once tried to steal her crown, but a deacon who had dedicated his life to extending grace to others society had abandoned. Sarah, now 13, read Scripture with the confidence of someone who had witnessed miracles firsthand. The rehabilitation program had helped 43 men find housing, employment, and renewed relationships with families they had hurt through addiction and crime. Tommy Rodriguez served as assistant director, his own transformation inspiring newcomers who arrived carrying the same desperation Marcus had once known. Henry Morrison, now retired from security work but still volunteering as church treasurer, welcomed visitors who came seeking their own encounters with divine intervention. The Virgin Mary's alcove remained a place of pilgrimage, where the scent of roses still appeared unexpectedly and broken hearts found healing through mysterious grace. Marcus concluded his testimony by looking directly at the statue that had changed everything. Her painted eyes held the same infinite compassion, reminding him that mercy was not earned but freely given to anyone humble enough to receive it. If you have experienced moments when grace found you in your darkest hour, share your story with others still searching for their way home.